6-0 your final score as the Eagles fall to the Jets in Game 4 of preseason action. Welcome to the Postgame Show presented by Ricoh. I'm Amy Campbell. Fran Duffy. Fran, thus concludes preseason game action for the Eagles for 2019. We've made it.
We made it. It was a long summer. Training camp was great. The preseason was great. But time to start talking about some real football that counts in the standings, which I am so ecstatic to do next week.
Yeah, we look forward to that, but we're not quite there yet. Let's talk about this game a little bit, Fran. Any takeaways for you from this one?
Well, I think, obviously, look, the offense had a couple of untimely negative plays that kept them from reaching the end zone. But I think ultimately you look at what this defense was able to do, and a lot of young players playing at all three levels of the defense here for Jim Schwartz and the rest of that defensive staff. And you saw some really good things. We continue to see some good play from that defensive front. We'll talk about one of those players here coming up. But ultimately, you like some of the things you saw on the defensive side of the ball. And we saw some highlights on offense as well, even though it didn't result in points.
I want to let our viewers know, if you're watching on Facebook, you can send us your questions. We'll be taking those throughout the night as well. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. We'll be here to kind of respond to that as well. Fran, one of the big storylines, really this storyline coming into this night, is that jobs are on the line for a lot of these players. So much is on the line. This really the last big opportunity before the roster goes from the 92. Backup roles in the NFL. What are people looking for? What makes a solid backup role in the NFL?
Sure. I think really when you look at the backups on any NFL roster, really, all teams right now, they know for the most part who the starters are. There was no starting jobs really around the NFL that were decided here on Thursday night. But when you look around, everybody's trying to pick and choose who the backups are going to be. Maybe not even the primary backups, but those secondary and tertiary backups, the bottom end of your roster. So where are those players coming from? Well, really, in my mind, it comes into three different buckets. You've got your veterans who are really mentors and leaders and have that kind of influence on younger players in the roster, so they bring plenty of value, help make players around them better. Number two, you've got your developmental players, so guys that you expect to become starters down the line. And then the third are those well-defined role players, your third down running backs, your nickel corners and dime corners, your sub-package pass rushers along the defensive line. All of those are very defined roles. So you're fitting into one of those three buckets: veteran leader, developmental young player, or a defined role player.
So many things that can determine what value is more than just the pure athleticism. Yes. The roles are specifically defined. That was one thing that stood out to me about the halftime interview between Dave Spadaro and Howie Roseman, that Howie said, look, it's not our job to just amass a bunch of talent. It's our job to build a complete team for the Eagles. Every role is specifically defined, starter, backup. He said, we're not just trying to collect a bunch of talent. We're trying to build the best team possible for the Eagles. And so value can be defined in a lot of different ways, and that's what this team is doing from top to bottom.
Yeah, I think really, and you're around players, right? Whether it's here or with Sports Illustrated, you've been around players. You know that they all come in different boxes, right? Some guys are great students of the game. Some guys don't really put in that kind of work. Some guys are just very natural. Other guys have to really, really work hard to reach that ceiling. And so I had an opportunity. We talked about it on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast fueled by Gatorade earlier this summer. I had an opportunity to go down and join Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks at the O-Line Mastermind Summit. And, an event like that, Amy, really opened my eyes to really what guys are like behind the scenes from a preparation standpoint. Because you talk to them here in the locker room, you talk to them in the cafeteria or in the hallway, you get a sense of what they're like. But, you go down and you see what they're like from a preparation standpoint, the work that they put in, and you get a sense of, man, like that's how this guy lasted in the NFL for 12 years. Maybe not the best player purely off film, the number one guy you'd say, oh, this guy's a first-round pick, but this guy lasted in the NFL because he really, really works at it. Those guys end up sticking on rosters, and those are the guys that really are the glue of your football team.
Even talking to Ike Reese about this last week, he said, look, I was able to have such a long career because of my commitment to special teams, and for some reason, it's not something that every guy values the way they should, when it can be something that can extend your employment in the NFL. It can keep those paychecks coming, and so you talk about value and how important that can be. Special teams, a huge part of it. We talk about it all the time. It's almost a bit of a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. Let's go back to that game, our player that stood out, Fran, you and I came to a unanimous agreement on this. It was not very difficult. Deshaun Hall, who has really made a lot of noise this preseason. He had another sack in this game, 4 total for the preseason. That leads the team, and I believe it leads the league
One of the
as
leaders
well.
of the league, yeah. It may have changed tonight. But,
right.
Certainly one of the more productive defensive linemen in the NFL this summer. And look, the guy has really earned, where he's gotten to at this point, where he's now fighting for a job on the 53-man roster. He's been so productive, a former third-round pick out in Carolina. Talented player, and he's played very, very well this summer, and that showed up again tonight.
All right, a couple of important dates coming up this weekend. Howie Roseman going to be very busy. I believe Dave Spadaro jokingly said Howie doesn't need to sleep. He probably won't be doing a lot of sleeping over the next few days. Again, Saturday, 4 p.m., that is the deadline for the roster to go from the 90 to the 53. Sunday at noon, that is the deadline to put in waiver claims on the players. And then an hour later, Sunday at 1 p.m., you can make your 10-man practice squad. So a lot going on over this weekend, especially that 1 hour between the waiver claims and the practice squad. There's 10 guys that they can get to add value to that. And there's just so many different ways this thing can go.
Yeah, because the practice squad is not just built by players that are on your own roster. We mentioned it on the kickoff show. It can also be players that are on other rosters. So the pro scouting department right now, those guys are invaluable to the coaching staff, to Howie Roseman, to help acquire more talent. They're scouring all of their assigned teams. Everybody in that scouting department has assigned a handful of teams, and they know everybody on the 90-man roster for each of those squads. And so when somebody is waived or somebody is cut, they say, hey, you know what? This guy would fill this role. We talked about those 3 different roles. This guy would fill this role for us on this football team. They can help us win a championship, and those guys get acquired. We see that year after year after year. The Eagles go out and they're aggressive at this point in the summer. I wouldn't expect that to change. I expect them to always be looking. They're always looking to acquire more talent every phase of the year.
That's totally the MO for Howie Roseman and that front office staff. I wish I remember who I saw that tweeted this, but it really put things in perspective for me a little bit too, of a lot of guys who are going to not make this team, and it's going to be a really disappointing thing for them. They have the opportunity to be picked up by other teams, but there are guys who are going to make teams that are then going to be cut when someone else becomes available, and all of that maneuvering as well. So even when that first roster comes out, there's still going to be moves that are made and a lot of changes that happen from there to the practice squad as things settle down.
It's a roller coaster of emotions for those guys that are on the bubble right now, because you don't know if that call that you get is going to be your last call with the organization. And so you may think you're safe on Saturday at 4 p.m. and then find out Sunday at 11:30 that you're not. And it's like we talked about in the kickoff show. It's just the nature of the business this time of year. It is just really, really tough for everybody involved on both sides. Players, personnel, the teams, veteran players, they still kind of feel that hurt. Guys that, are out of the league and have been out of the league for a decade, this time of year, they definitely feel it.
I think it's something that most guys in the league can relate to as well. We mentioned a lot of choices that are going to be upcoming. We're going to break down the roster position by position. We'll start with the quarterbacks. We got 5 guys on this roster as of now. Here's the list, Fran. What stands out to you?
Yeah, I think ultimately when you look at the list, and it's obviously a number of guys from different areas of acquisition for the Eagles, right? You've got veteran signings, you've got guys who were bought in late in the offseason, you've got draft picks, the guys like Nate Sudfeld were acquired, after cutdown day, right? So I think ultimately the Eagles have done a really good job of acquiring talent a number of different ways at that position. Now it comes down to what we talked about earlier, right? The 3 different buckets for a backup quarterback. And when you're looking for a backup quarterback, you're looking for, number 1, someone who can be reliable. Number 2, a coach on the sideline, someone that can be, a sounding board for the starting quarterback, not just in the meeting room and during practice, but in the game. I mean, if you go and you watch, the micings of Carson Wentz and of Nick Foles during the Super Bowl run, and you see the interactions both those guys had with each other on the sideline in between series, where they'd come to the sideline, and Carson would say to Nick, "Hey, what did you see there?" And Nick would ask Carson, "Hey, what did the defense do there?" And they're able to kind of bounce things off each other. Coach isn't even involved. That's what you want from a backup quarterback. So that's something we don't see. We don't see that on film. We don't see that watching the broadcast. That's just something that the coaches are very well aware of, and the guys in that room are well aware of. So it's a matter of who's that number 2 guy, And then if you want to carry a third, is that a developmental player? Is that somebody else that can also impact in that area? That's the decision they have to make.
Well, one of the things we've heard for the last few seasons that's so unique about the Eagles quarterback room is how well these guys support each other, how they complement each other, and what a great chemistry that room has and how unique it is across the NFL. Let's keep moving. Let's look at the running back position, one that we've heard all preseason long is an incredibly deep position.
Yep.
A lot of tough choices for this coaching staff in this front office when we look at. That's an impressive list there.
Yeah, I mean, and ultimately
good problem to have, but definitely, a tough one.
Exactly, and there's just a lot of guys with proven resumes. I mean, that's really what it comes down to when you look at this running back room is that there are players with NFL experience. There's guys with lots of promise, guys that have done things even in short times in the NFL. That's what makes this a very difficult decision. But ultimately, when you're looking at that running back room, you want guys that can fit roles. Everybody now talks about running back by committee. Well, in order for that to happen, you need a committee and guys that can fill different roles in that committee. So, do you have someone that can play on early downs? Do you have someone that can play on third down, goal line, short yardage? Now, can someone play special teams? Can someone be a good pass protector? You need all of that into the mix. Now, that's where the other buckets come into play, right? Do you have someone that's developmental that you hope can be an early down back or you hope can turn into a really good third down player? And special teams as well, so important. Not just, in the core special teamers, as blockers and guys that can get downfield and get after the football, but also the return game. If you could be a kick returner or a punt returner, that can add to your value as well.
Well, in that running back position, one where we are wait and see how many are going to be on this roster. What is the coaching staff, the front office, how many are they planning on keeping? A position last season that we saw had a lot of injuries and a lot of attrition, for lack of a better word there. So it's going to be interesting to see how many running backs do make this roster. Let's keep with the offense. Let's move on to the wide receiver group. Another long list of players, a lot of options for the coaching staff.
There's going to be some tough choices in this room as well because there's a lot of talent in that wide receiver room. And ultimately, what your starting receivers are going to look like, your 1, 2, and number 3. Then it goes to your 4, your 5, and maybe your 6th spot. What traits do you need from those 3 guys? And I think ultimately you're looking for players that can help as blockers, that can help on special teams, and then also can do different things for you in different packages. Whether that means you're a red zone threat or you're kind of a do-everything player that can be moved around the formation and used in different ways to kind of throw the defense off balance. Those kinds of players bring lots of value. That versatility can offer a lot of value to an offensive coaching staff. And the Eagles have a little bit of all that in this receiver room, so it's going to be interesting to see which way they decide to go with that group overall.
Yeah, long list of guys there. I think I counted 10 on the roster there for that position, so certainly a lot of choices. Let's keep going. Let's go to the tight ends.
Yep.
Let's take a look at not as many as the wide receivers, but still going to be some difficult choices for the coaching staff. And just some thoughts about how they're going to, how they see that position group and what they want to make it here.
Well, you know that this is going to be a tight end-centric offense, right? Because you've got Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert on the roster. You know that the offense is going to be, heavily involved with 12 personnel with 2 tight ends. So for that, you're also going to need some help from your backup tight ends. You need those guys to be involved. So you need guys that can block. You need players that can impact the passing game and also players that can go out and play special teams because especially with the changed rules, Amy, in special teams, you need those combo players. And what I mean by a combo player is not necessarily a small, undersized skill guy and not a big lumbering lineman, but those linebackers and bigger safeties and tight ends. They need to be your core special teams player. So whoever that 3rd, potentially 4th tight end is, they need to be active on all 4 core special teams. That's kickoff, kick return, punt return. They have to be active participants there.
So let's pause the roster discussion for a minute. And Fran, you've been here a long time. You've been in the building around the whole roster making process. What is it like the next few days? Just the energy, all of the decisions being made. I imagine there's just a lot of different feelings going through the air here. What are the next few days like for people who are not in this building the way that you have access to? What is it like?
Well, there's 2 sides of the coin because on one side, you're very excited about the start of the regular season and to get things going. And, you see all that hard work that's happened over the offseason is now about to come to fruition. And then the second side of that is then the idea that you got to get rid of some football players. And so it is very tense. It is a little bit quiet. It is a little bit somber. So, there's not as much joking around in the cafeteria or in the hallways or anything like that. It is a tough couple of days, but on the back end of that, there's also a level of excitement. And so that's what you're really, trying to hang your hat on as you're moving around and moving to the next few days.
From the past, do you have any crazy stories of anything that you've seen? I know I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but I'm just curious. There's always a lot of surprises. There's always a lot of unexpected things. Have you any crazy moves that you've seen this staff make before?
Yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I mean, look, every one of these kind of stands on its own. As there's always those little decisions that you can kind of look back and you say, man, like, remember that? And then 1 year later, it's forgotten because you're moving on to the very next season. So, like I said, it's a very kind of up and down roller coaster a few days, but the team gets through it. Now you're excited for week 1.
Well, and speaking of that excitement, if you're a young player trying to make this roster, how exciting is this process when, you see for me, I'm a theater kid, right? And, you see your name on the cast list when you go and check. What must that feel like for a young guy, especially with just how difficult the process can be to make it to that point?
I mean, it's kind of what we just talked about, where it's all that hard work that you've put in. If you're a rookie, you go back to your college season ends, and you are immediately going into training for the NFL draft. You're going to the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Game. Then you're going to the Combine potentially. You're worried about Pro Day, and you're getting shipped around plane to plane to plane to plane, going from team to team to team for all those private visits and workouts and secrecy, and you're working out with agents, and you're finding out where you're going to go in different hotel rooms. It's a crazy process. And then right from there, you've got draft weekend, and then boom, you're in minicamp. And then you're in there OTA, and then you got a couple weeks off, and then you're at training camp. It is a whirlwind. So for those guys, not even necessarily the first and second, third round picks, guys that you expect to make the team, but the late round picks, the undrafted free agents, those guys that make it, it's a whirlwind. But it's like we mentioned too, you don't want to get too high because you never know how long that feeling will last.
Things change so quickly. So as an insider who covers the draft process, you're around so many of these players as they go. Like you said, the Senior Bowl, the Shrine Game, their pro days. So much goes into this. One thing that stood out to me really when I was around these guys, they're doing these games, they're putting everything on tape that they possibly can, and then they're going and doing interviews, then they're doing private workouts. I mean, the fatigue is beyond physical and mental, and then you come into camp and you're fighting for your life. I mean, the mental fatigue that goes into this for a guy, I don't think people realize how intense the process is to make a team.
Talking with players over the years, the second year guys, the guys that are coming into their second season, they all say how much of a relief it was just to even get to the off season because you didn't have that a year ago. It really is a whirlwind from the time their college season ends up until the end of their first season, their rookie campaign. It's craziness, and you want that feeling to go as long as possible. Remember, these are guys that are used to maybe playing minimum 12 games, maximum 13 or 14 if they play at Alabama or Oklahoma or Clemson. Then you get those 14th games, but 12 games, that gets you to week 8 of the regular season. I mean, it's a crazy process for those rookies. So, yeah, it's for those guys coming into their second year, the offseason is a nice little retreat.
And not only that, you're mentally fatigued. You're just thrown into this situation where everybody is used to being there, bigger, stronger, faster. They've been doing it longer than you. You hear this cliche of the game speeds up exponentially. And can you imagine being so mentally fatigued and then you're thrown into this job interview situation where you're basically swimming, trying to learn and to catch up and to act like you've been there, look like you've been there. So many things go into it for these guys.
Yeah, and that's why when coaches and scouts and everybody works with these players during the pre-draft process, it's not just about, what does the guy look like on film? It's what is he made of from a mental standpoint and from a competitive standpoint, a toughness standpoint. All of those things go into it because you have to be able to hold up in the NFL. You can't just show up, and your jaw hits the floor and say, like, whoa, like there's Carson Wentz. Like,
right.
Like that's
you gotta
Brandon
act
Graham.
like you've been there before.
Exactly. You got to show up and you got to compete with these guys and you got to make plays for them. They're relying on you just as much as you're relying on them. You need all those guys to be able to come in and mesh immediately. And so that's why those traits, the things that you try and find out away from the field, they're just as important.
And that's something I can really relate to because, true story, when I came here for my interview with the Eagles and I met Fran Duffy, I was like, whoa, it's Fran Duffy. I've been following his work for years.
Now,
and
Amy,
now...
let's pump the brakes a little bit.
Now we're talking. Of course, we are awaiting the thoughts of head coach Doug Pederson. Here's the press conference room. Hopefully he will be here soon. We want to, of course, hear his thoughts to summarize the final preseason game. A lot of questions, I'm sure, that will be asked and answered just about the entire process, the roster making as well. We heard from him pregame. We've heard from him all week just about his empathy for this situation, understanding he's been there, understanding the big moment that these guys are going through. What kind of impact do you think that has on a guy to have a coach that really understands what this process is like and what they're feeling on a day like today?
There's sincerity with it, and the guys, they understand that they're not getting, fed, a fake truth, so they understand, hey, the coach has been in my seat before. He knows what it feels like. He's not going to, kind of sell me up the river and say one thing but really mean another. That's what really allows Doug to be able to connect with these players on such a high level, and it's what makes him the coach that he is. And you see that, when we show on Eagles Unscripted, all the different behind-the-scenes access with Doug at meetings and things like that. I mean, he's able to connect with these guys. You see him out of practice and the relationships he's got with those guys. That shows up, and that means a lot to those guys.
And it means a lot to free agents who have choices to make. I mean, that's something we hear all the time here is from free agents who have some choices to make, some of them who are still trying to make this team, but they had choices about what team they wanted to go do their preseason with and try and make that team. They love the way that Coach Pederson handles things, the way that this team does business. They feel like it has, that reputation goes throughout the league, and we see guys make that choice to join the Eagles because of that locker room and the way that they treat their players.
Yeah, and that goes to also the culture that not only that Doug has built in the locker room, but that the players are able to kind of maintain that culture and govern that culture. So you've got those leaders, the Carson Wentzes, the Malcolm Jenkins, and the Jason Peters and Jason Kelsey, the Brandon Grahams and Fletcher Coxes. They're able to maintain that, so it makes it a fun atmosphere. And you're right. I mean, you talk to Malik Jackson when he gets here, that's one of the first things that comes out of his mouth is, yeah, you know what? This was the kind of place that I wanted to be at. Not only are we going to compete for a title, but it's a great atmosphere for me to be able to continue my professional career. And you hear that from those guys time and time and time again.
Absolutely. So as we have preseason game number 4 in the books, it's kind of a surreal feeling. I feel like we've been doing this for a while already. We've seen a lot this preseason, a lot of standout moments. Anything that has you particularly excited for this season to get started?
I'm just excited for this Eagles offense.
Yeah.
You look at Carson Wentz coming back, and you have all these weapons. You add in a Deshaun Jackson, you add Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders. You bring back Dallas Goedert to pair with Zach Ertz, and I've talked so much about 12 personnel, the 2 tight end sets, and what that'll mean for Doug Pederson and Mike Rowe and that offensive staff. I am so excited because now this offense has so many different ways to beat you. As a defense, if you're strong in one area, the Eagles can attack you in that area where you're weaker, and vice versa. So they can find different ways to beat you. That's what really has me most excited. It's just getting ready to see the fireworks that Carson Wentz and the rest of that group can put on display.
And as things come together, and that will unfold over the next few days as Howie Roseman and his staff gets to work. We've talked a lot about how aggressive he is, how he's always working the phones, how he's always trying to go make the big move. It's something that we love, that Eagles fans love, just that MO of that aggressiveness. How do you see that philosophy comparing around the league? Not every front office is that aggressive. It's just, your apples and your oranges. How does Howie's aggressiveness compare with what other front offices around the league are doing?
That's ready to compete for a Super Bowl, and they have done that over the last couple of years. And so, we've talked about it time and time again on our daily podcasts over during training camp on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast is, instead of going out, if there was an injury on the bottom end of the roster or if they needed to bring in a 90th man or an 89th man, they weren't bringing in some undrafted free agent from, Lindenwood College or from Drake University. No, they were bringing in a guy who's been in the NFL for 3-4 years. They were going and signing a Jonathan Cyprien, who was a second-round pick, or they were going, after guys who have played in the NFL. Those guys are competing for jobs. A Kasim Edebali they, acquire, and those guys have played in the NFL. They're here to fight for their career. Those are guys that are going to bring competitive juices that not only, this guy could come in and make our team, but he's going to bring the best out of our young players and make sure that those guys are all battling. And that's ultimately what you want, that aggressiveness. But if you're a team that's a little bit further away, 5 years ago, that wasn't necessarily the kind of player you were looking for. You're looking for someone a little bit more high upside that you can try and develop and control the rights and stuff like that. Those are all the things you worry about if you're a little bit further away. But where the Eagles are at right now, from a competitive standpoint, that allows you to go and be a little bit more aggressive, which is what we've seen from them over the course of the last few weeks.
Well, and it's something we've continued to hear all preseason, this idea of churning the roster, of causing that competition. And here comes Coach. We're going to hear from him a little bit more right now.
Okay. Doug, if you look at Clayton Thorson, how would you say he's playing relative to what you expect going into this summer?
I think he's playing probably like a rookie quarterback should and would be at this time, quite honestly. You know, going all the way back to the off season, starting after the draft and all the way through to tonight's game. I mean, you know, it's not easy to play quarterback in the National Football League, and the things that he has done in practice, even in some of these games, it may not look like it because of the end result, but he's made a lot of progress this entire training camp. So my hat's off to him and how he's worked and how he's prepared.
What did you see from the young defensive ends tonight?
I thought they played hard. We got after the quarterback. They closed on a couple of tackle for losses. I thought they came ready to play. I mean, it was good to see. In this last game, the energy level they had, the effort that they gave. Obviously, look more at it tomorrow when we check out the tape. But I thought overall played well.
Doug, is there one position that is going to be tougher than maybe the toughest of them all to make a cut at?
I think they're all tough. I just told the guys in the locker room that, these next few days are the hardest few days we have. You got 90 or so players, and you got to get to 53, and then you build back your practice squad guys. I mean, it's a tough business, and I just appreciate all the hard work that these guys did through training camp, obviously through the off season, and they left it in our hands, and now it's our opportunity now to make some tough decisions in the next couple of days.
How do you evaluate how Mac Hollins has played this preseason? He's been a little more active the last couple of weeks.
We just got to go back and look at everything, the full body work, and obviously his health coming in was an issue, but he battled through that, got himself healthy and back on the field, and he fought through that, and that's commendable. And we just got to look at the whole body of work and see and again make some tough decisions on these guys.
What did you find out about Jordan Mailata's injury?
We're actually going to get another update in the morning when we get back tonight, and then in the morning when we do our medical. And so on Monday I should have probably a better update, with where he's at.
Doug, obviously, Sean's situation a little unfortunate. Just how serious is it? Can you just clear that up just as far as do you expect him for week 1 in 10 days?
He'll be fine.
Doug, on a different note, Rudy Ford wasn't out there tonight. Why wasn't he playing?
He's got a lower body issue that just needed some rest.
And then you had Cameron Johnston on the kickoff. What was the reason for that?
Just in case. I mean, you've seen us in the past when Jake's gone down and we've used Camus, and it's just an opportunity to get Cam a drop kick on a kickoff that could be beneficial for us if something were to happen to Jake during the season.
No issues with Jake at all?
No, it was just something we wanted to do.
Where does tonight leave Wendell Smallwood?
Again, Wendell's a player that we know, man. We got a lot of history with him, and unfortunate. Gosh, that one run tonight. I mean, we had a trap inside, and the backer hit a ball on the tackle on the ball. It came out, but Wendell's a guy that we understand. We kind of know him, and he. Last week it was Corey's opportunity last week, his opportunity this week, and would have played last week. The game was shortened, obviously, but he's right in the mix.
What made you not want to play Andre Dillard tonight, knowing that he's not going into the season as a starter?
Andre's gotten a lot of work at tackle, especially left tackle, all through training camp. I mean, that was been the primary focus with him. And, for a guy that could be part of the 7 on game day, just wanted to give him extra rest.
Do you ever keep a player who might not figure into your plans as much, but he's earned a spot and it kind of proves to the rest of the guys that he can?
Yeah, I think every year there's that one guy, sometimes two guys that on every team. It might be a surprise to you guys, it might be a surprise to the fans, but to us, it's no surprise based on how that player has worked. And guys make teams all the time, because of that, their effort, their energy, their willingness to practice, and make an impact.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Coach said these next few days are the hardest few days that we have. That really stood out to me. Totally understands. This is going to be a difficult process to narrow this roster down to 53 from 90.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we talked about just a few minutes before the press conference, and that he's got a lot of empathy for the players on the bottom of this roster that aren't going to be here in a couple of days, and that was reflected, I thought, in the press conference.
Absolutely, I appreciate Coach's empathy and understanding there. We'll continue our roster breakdown in just a minute. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us.
Specialty player. You're not going to necessarily have that as much on the offensive line, but versatility is key unless you are a high-end developmental player or a very reliable veteran backup who can kind of offer that mentorship for the young players in that room.
Well, and that's a luxury of this Eagles team, is that they have all of those things when it comes to this position group, because there is such talent, because there is such depth.
Yes.
They have those developmental guys as well. Really one of the best units in the NFL.
No question.
And it's remarkable, because even when you go down the line, you look at the starters, I mean, some of the best to ever do it. You look at some of the backups, I mean, they could be starting on most teams in the NFL. So just the versatility and the ability of these guys to play multiple positions, I mean, just a luxury for this team, really, and a testament to how well they've built this roster.
Offensive line depth around the NFL is a plague right now. I mean, nobody has good offensive line depth, and the Eagles are one of a handful, a handful of teams that have good quality offensive line depth. And we'll take a look at the centers now on this roster. You know, I remember we had Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network in the studio right here to talk on the Journey to the Draft podcast. That was his number one takeaway, was, you know, just looking at this offensive line and the depth that the Eagles do have. And that's a testament to Howie Roseman, that scouting staff, as well as the coaching staff, Jeff Stoutland and his group, that really have helped develop all of these young guys. They acquire the talent from the scouting side, and then they coach them up and develop them here during the spring and during the summer, and that's paying dividends now. It's a very talented group.
Well, and a good offensive line coach, not easy to find as well.
No.
So the Eagles very, very thankful for Coach Jeff Stoutland there. Let's switch to the defense. Let's take a look at the safeties on this roster currently. That's a long list of guys as well. Fran, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think ultimately when you're looking at safeties, you're looking for players that, can impact you in a couple different ways. And every team is a little bit different with how they use their safeties. Are you a free safety, strong safety team? Are you a left safety, right safety? Do you need your guys to just be interchangeable and be able to do everything? Every team treats that a little bit differently. But ultimately, when you look at your safeties, the backups need to be able to play special teams. They're those combo players that I mentioned earlier. You need them to be able to impact special teams. You need them to be reliable players, because if one guy goes down in that secondary, you need the backup to be able to step in, and you can't be like the chink in the armor that all of a sudden that's where the offense is going to go to like a magnet. You have got to be able to be reliable as a backup defensive back to the point where you can be at least adequate in what you're asked to do on defense. So you need to be reliable. Versatility is big, and special teams.
Well, we're going to continue looking in the secondary at the cornerbacks. And when you look at the safeties and the corners, really, last season, so many injuries. There were a lot of guys, a lot of really young, really green guys who were thrown out into the fire, really, and were able to get some amazing experience. Now you look around, this is a position of depth because of all those young guys who were able to get some real meaningful reps last season. When you look at this cornerback roster, a lot of choices for the coaching staff as well.
One of the deepest groups on the team without question. And I think ultimately when you're looking at corner, you want versatility, because this is a sub-package league. We hear this all the time, right? So many snaps of both nickel package, where you have 5 DBs on the field, and dime, where there are 6 defensive backs on the field. More than half the team is defensive backs. So you need the ability to be able to play multiple positions, and the Eagles have a ton of guys that have played both corner spots, played inside, outside, have safety experience. This is a very, very versatile group, and it's a very competitive group. It's one of my favorite position groups on the team. So when you look at this cornerback group, you need guys that are going to be able to come in and battle, be competitive, be versatile, and again, broken record, play special teams.
Right, yes. If we haven't covered it enough, special teams are very important. And of course, Jim Schwartz really able to be creative with the different options there in the secondary as well as up front. Let's take a look at that defensive end position. An aggressive unit, guys who are going to be rushing the passer. It's something we've talked about all season long, or all preseason long, and we'll be talking about all season long. This what stands out to you about this part of the roster?
Yeah, at defensive end, number one, you have your guys that are going to be starters, but this is a team that likes to rotate. So, those backups, that third and fourth defensive end, they're going to play a good amount of snaps. Now, I would say that with the addition of Malik Jackson, they're probably going to play a little bit less than what we've seen, because remember, when they would go into pass rushing downs before, it would be Brandon Graham. Last year it was Michael Bennett. Guys would slide in to play as a defensive tackle. With Malik Jackson on the roster, there's no need for that necessarily, but you still want that third and fourth defensive end to be able to come in, get after the quarterback, or be a really good early downs run player. So you want one of those two traits. Also, a kicker, if you can go out and play special teams as well, if you can go out and be a lead blocker on kick return or something of that nature. We've seen some of the young defensive ends on this team this summer go out and compete in at least one area of special teams. You'd like that as a little bit of a cherry on top as well.
That's great. Let's slide over to the defensive tackle position. You mentioned Malik Jackson, a lot of competition there at that. Again, an aggressive unit. Jim Schwartz loves to have his guys really aggressive up front after the quarterback on the outside and blowing things up on the inside. What stands out to you about this unit?
Yeah, and ultimately it comes down to some of the same things that we've talked about already. So you want some of that versatility, the ability to come in and be a 3-down backup. So whether you're a pass rusher that can get after it on 3rd down or an early downs run stuffer, look, we've seen backup defensive tackles. I mean, we're going back. Like, I'm thinking early stages of my fandom. I'm thinking Sam Rayburn and Paul Grassmanis, guys that came off and were spark plugs off the bench, and guys like Derek Landry when I first got here in 2011, 2012. I think back to last year, Trayvon Hester, double doink, with, got a fingertip on the ball on Cody Parkey's field goal. You need those backup defensive tackles to come in and give you quality snaps on defense. And look, impact special teams. Trayvon Hester the last year. You need those guys to be able to impact as well.
That's a great throwback Thursday there. Let's continue with our final unit on defense, the linebacking core, which there's been a lot of opportunities with all of the injuries there and a long list of guys there as well. I think this is one of the positions that has the most guys on the roster as well, that between that and cornerback. So a lot of options there as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of a split discussion on this from a national standpoint. We'll talk about it from a media standpoint, because a lot of people would say, oh, you don't need to carry as many linebackers now as you maybe need to do 5, 6, 7 years ago because of what we discussed earlier. So many defensive backs playing now. You're taking linebackers on the field or off the field. Why do you need so many on the roster? Well, it's simple. The third phase of the game. You need them to play special teams. They're your core special teams players. And when you go down in goal line, you're not playing 6 defensive backs down on the 2-yard line. You need those linebackers to come on the field and be able to hold up, or else you're going to be like Swiss cheese inside the 5. So you need to be able to come in and offer some value in those specific roles. And then from a starting standpoint, if you're going to come in and be that guy, you want to be athletic and be able to come in. You know, we've seen guys like Kamu Grugier-Hill, who's obviously not in this role now compared to what he, based off what we've seen this summer before his injury. But when he first got here, he was athletic, so he was a developmental player who played special teams, became a special teams captain. That's kind of what you're looking for. You mentioned it. Ike Reese, early in his career, he was a backup linebacker who offered special team snaps and was a great special teamer, and the versatility to be a pass-rushing defensive end on passing downs. And that's how you make it as a linebacker. Find some kind of specialty role in sub-package, be a great special teamer, and a guy with upside on the back end of the roster.
And if there's one thing no team wants to be, it's Swiss cheese on the goal line. You can make that quotable, Fran Duffy, on this date in 2019. So we're wrapping up the Eagles preseason. We are looking ahead to Game 1 versus Washington. We will talk about that game a little bit more on the other side of this break. Stay with us. September 8th, it's coming versus Washington. That game is at 1 p.m. Of course, Fran, another exciting schedule. We could just talk about every single game, but let's focus on Washington. Kind of the big story. We know who's going to be the quarterback for them. Case Keenum, a familiar face for Eagles fans.
Yeah, but no matter who was going to be quarterback for them, whether it was Keenum or Colt McCoy before he got injured, the rookie Dwayne Haskins, this was a team that needs to run the football. So Adrian Peterson was the starter last year because Darius Geist, the second-round pick, tore his ACL in training camp. Well, Geist is back, and he did have a really nice game in his preseason debut last week. So I think ultimately Darius Geist is going to be the guy that the Eagles need to make sure they stop. He's a physical, downhill back, very, very competitive. A little bit of a tease. He's going to be one of the subjects we cover on Eagles Game Plan next week. We plan to shoot on Monday and Tuesday next week. So really excited to kind of get that thing going back, get that show back up and running. Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast will be back as well with myself and Greg Cosell. We'll be talking all about the matchup. But with that Redskins offense, it's all about stopping Darius Geist and Adrian Peterson in that run game.
Excuse me. You will not find a better X's and O's breakdown than the Eagle Eye in the Sky. I'm excited it's going to be back. Let's talk about their defense a little bit. What are some of the challenges that this Eagles offense is going to face? Obviously, Eagles, a lot of weapons, a lot of choices to kind of create their game however they want based off of the defense they're going to see.
Yeah, the strength of that Washington defense is their front. You look at that three-man defensive line, a couple first-round picks there. Jonathan Allen at defensive end, Dayron Payne at nose tackle. They've got a local kid in Matt Ioannidis, a former Temple product. So you've got those three guys up front, very disruptive. Payne, I think, has the ability to be an elite player at the defensive tackle spot. They've got some pass rushers. Ryan Kerrigan has been a thorn in the Eagles side over the course of his career, and then a former first-round pick, I should say a current first-round pick in Montez Sweat, who they took at the end of the first round in this April's draft. So they've got a lot of talent in that front seven. Linebacker, a little bit iffy, trying to win some matchups there. They went and signed Landon Collins away from the New York Giants as a guy that can try and match up with tight ends. So, you want to try and find your matchups in the secondary, but first and foremost, it'll be about winning the battle in the trenches. You've got to stop that defensive line in Washington.
Yeah, that defensive line, gosh, Ryan, you walked through those names. A lot of my favorite college players somehow ended up on that defensive line. It's going to be a great battle. Of course, we will be here to break it all down on the pregame show at 12:30 p.m. on September 8th. Just over a week away. Fran, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself for the next 10 days until that happens.
I have an idea of what I'll be doing. I'll be watching film.
You'll be watching film. Yeah, I have an idea what you'll be doing. I'll just be counting down the moments until we meet again. Again, thank you for joining us on the postgame show presented by Ricoh. Fran Duffy, Amy Campbell. We'll see you next time.